Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Clark, and in this video, we are gonna take a second look at how to play riffs and licks in between your chord changes. Now, just like the last video, I'm not gonna be showing you a bunch of licks that you can copy and paste into your own playing. Instead, what I wanna do is show you how you can start coming up with your own riffs and licks and essentially be able to improvise as you play through your chord changes. The goal here is to unlock a new type of freedom for you where your creativity and your originality are gonna come first. And while this might sound like a pretty advanced approach to this concept, I can assure you that it is not. As long as you have some basic skills under your belt and some basic theory knowledge, you're gonna have no problem. So in part one of this little series, what we really focused on was using our chord roadmaps and then using those notes on our low E and A strings to give us a bunch of notes that we were kind of allowed to play around with in between our chord changes. Now that didn't give you a ton to work with, so from there what we did is we looked at one position of a minor or major pentatonic scale that we eventually built out into a full major or minor scale. So what I want to do in this video is just kind of expand on that idea and show you two other positions where you can play that same scale, which might be a little bit more easily accessible from certain other chords inside of your key. And to give you an idea of what I mean, if this is going to be our sixth chord, so our minor sixth chord, what we were doing in the last video was we were playing this shape right here. And that scale was just linked onto our chord roadmap. So for example, in that key, which is B minor or D major, we had our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then that being right over our 6. So whether you do the pentatonic or you do the full major or minor shape, depending on the note that you start on or end on. But what we have is a whole bunch of other scale shapes all over the fretboard that are totally connected that use the exact same notes. And because they use the exact same notes, what it kind of allows us to do is whichever chord we're on, we can then jump into that position. Now, obviously this is gonna require some extra memorization of these shapes. So please don't feel like you need to have both of these new shapes just completely grasped and memorized by the end of this video. It is gonna take you some time to get it under your fingers, but let's get into our first connected shape. So we're gonna use that same key. So the key of D major and the roadmap that's rooted on the A string. So in the key of D, that's gonna give us our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And just as a reminder, we do have our 7 and a return to our 1. And above here, we have a 4, 3, 2, 1. And then we can keep going down if we want. So we can kind of cover the whole fretboard with those low root notes. And it's very easy to access that first shape when we're playing over our sixth chord. The problem comes is as you move down to those other chords, it can be quite a jump to get up to that position. So the scale shape you're going to use is going to look like this. And you can see that every single note we play right here is the backside of our first scale shape. So you can see they just overlay right on top of each other. So this scale shape, every single note we play with our pinky here, or whichever finger you decide to use, is the exact same note right here from our scale in this position, which is great because it just means every single thing is going to be nice and connected. And now what you're gonna be able to do is use this new shape to be able to kind of noodle around when you're playing chords in that other position. So if you play a chord progression, I'm gonna be using bar chords, but you can very easily use little triad shapes or whatever you're comfortable with. But if I were to play a 4, 6, 5, I'll kind of show you what I mean. So all I'm really doing there is in the space between the chord changes. So obviously you want to kind of come down when the rest of the band is coming down on that change. But in the gaps in between, I'm just jumping in and playing a couple random notes from the scale. Now the notes that you choose from the scale are all going to have a different effect. And eventually your ear will start to lead you towards the notes that are going to sound better or worse. I don't want you thinking too hard about hitting chord tones right now. Really the goal should just be playing around, trying random notes, and just kind of seeing what works. Also, some notes are going to be a little bit harder to play coming out of that chord than others, but that's essentially all you're going to be doing here. Now, what you've got is these two shapes side by side, and they're connected, right, by this little bit here in the middle. So we've got and all of these are really just giving us our allowable or diatonic notes from the key that we're playing in. And what we can do here is we can actually jump between the two scales as well. We're not locked into one position when we're playing one chord. And I find a lot of people struggle with moving from one scale shape to another scale shape. So I'm gonna show you this little trick. And basically it comes from a technique called sliding. And sliding is something that is really easy to get the hang of. It's gonna feel a little bit alien maybe at first, might take you a little bit of time, but it's really not that challenging. And basically all you're gonna do is from this finger, let's use our third finger right here, and we're just gonna go from the 7th fret of the D string, and we're just gonna slide it up to the 9th. That's all we're doing. So all we're doing is we're playing down on that note, and then we're taking it, we're not touching it after, we're sliding it, so. Just like that. Don't worry if other strings ring out, not a big deal. Just kind of get the technique down. So you can support behind it with these other fingers to kind of give yourself a little bit more rigidity if you need to. Feels a little bit weird to just kind of have that finger by itself. Whatever you want, add vibrato, don't worry about it if you can't do that. But yeah, pick down, let the note ring through, and then slide up. And the goal is going to be to make sure that note is still sustaining when you make that slide. So you're going to pick down. If you go too slow, you're gonna lose some of that momentum. So what we wanna do is we kinda wanna make our slide pretty fast. And what this is gonna do for us is this is gonna essentially give us a bridge between the two scale shapes. So instead of going like this and playing through the scale shape and then, oh, I'm gonna move to this other scale shape, we're gonna use a slide, and this can be done at any point in the scale, to move ourselves up to the next scale. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start going through our scale here, and as we work our way up, when we reach this point right here, that note that we were just working on, we're gonna slide it up to the next shape. So, and what that's gonna do is that's gonna bridge those two scales together and put our hand automatically in a position to continue going up through the scale, but in this new position. So what that kind of looks like is, and for me, I prefer to use my pinky at that point, just because I'm more confident with my pinky than this ring finger. But if you want to use your ring finger, that's fine. You can really use any finger. The main thing is you want to use one of these two, this side of your hand, because then it puts these ones in a position to play those notes on the other side. And we can do the exact same thing going down into the other shape. Rather than sliding up to the next shape, we can slide down, and what we would do there is instead of using one of our higher two fingers from the higher frets, we're going to use our lowest finger, which is going to be our pointer finger, and we're going to do it from one of the lower points of that scale. So from this scale, whether we use the pentatonic version or the major minor version, it doesn't really matter. But when you're on one of these notes here, you can just simply you kind of see what I'm saying? You can do it at any point as long as you've memorized the scale shapes and you're going to land on the correct note. You're going to use these as little bridges, these slides as these little bridges between your scale shapes. And immediately it's going to make things sound more musical as well when you move between those shapes, rather than feeling so mechanical where you move one shape and then you shift everything up and play the next shape. These sliding techniques really do start pulling everything together. So this point here might be enough for you. Adding this extra shape is already gonna be a lot, and then trying to slide between these shapes is also a lot. Obviously, you're also playing chords while sliding between these shapes. What I would recommend is really work on just the scales, get those down, get them committed to memory, and then work on sliding back and forth between them, just playing around, finding what works for you and what sounds good to you. And then when you really start feeling comfortable, you can start incorporating it into those chord changes. And what I mean is when we're playing from there to here, we go here, you can start incorporating all the elements of the different things we worked on. I want to reiterate, I don't want you to just copy a riff from me. This is about giving you the freedom and the choice to be able to come up with your own parts. If things feel too fast, slow them down. If you're starting to feel overwhelmed, don't feel like you need to get this all at once. Go back to just those low string notes and play around with that between your changes. Then work your way up to adding a little bit of a scale. Don't even play the whole scale. Maybe you just learn the top few notes of both scales and work on connecting those together. Something you might have noticed is that in two of these kind of connection points, we're actually on those roadmap notes, those root notes of our main chords there. So those are great ones to use as your slides. So if I'm playing this position right here, you can start with putting the focus there, and then maybe as you get more comfortable, you can start building out into those vertical scale shapes as well. There's no hard and fast rules on the exact way that's gonna work best or sound the best. You just wanna make sure that what you're playing is making sense to you. The goal here is to really connect your brain with your fingers and what you're doing. If your brain is not engaged and actively listening and focusing on what you're playing, you're gonna find yourself stuck in a rut and on that dreaded guitar progress plateau that everybody talks about. So what I want to show you next is one more connected shape. And like I said, if this feels like too much already, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you can stop the video, you can come back here later when you're ready. But this shape might be one you're already familiar with. It's your standard position 1 major pentatonic scale. Alternatively, it's your full standard major scale shape. I've used it in other lessons before. And we're gonna do it based on this same key here. So going back to our original shape here, over top of our 6th chord, just like that. And this is gonna very much be our home base. So this is like the default position when you're playing. We know we have this shape right here that's connected on this side. And all we're gonna do now is we're gonna connect a shape to it on this side. So the shape is gonna look like this. And you've probably noticed that the notes that we're playing on this side of the shape are literally the same notes from this side of the other shape. So they're completely connected. Now, obviously the first step here is to get that shape under your fingers on its own first. Spend a bunch of time working on it, get that muscle memory built up, and then we can talk about connecting them the same way we connected the other ones using these little bridges. And all we would do is to slide into that position. It's, like I said, the exact same thing as the other one I showed you, is when we play up to a certain point, it can be any point in the scale. It can be here, we can do it right from the beginning, but any point where you're playing a note on this side of the scale, whether it's with your ring finger or your pinky, and then all we're gonna do is we're gonna slide it up to that next shape, and that's gonna get us in position to play the rest of those notes. My favorite point to bridge these two scales together is on the G string here. So as I come up the scale like this, I hit that note on the G string, and that's my sliding point. So And then again, any notes on this side of the scale are ones that I can use to slide back down to that other position and then potentially slide down into the other position. And they do all connect together with these little slides. Just to give you an idea of how this works sliding down, so bridging them the other direction. Again, it can be from any of these notes. Play around, find what works for you. But right here, and as you get more and more comfortable sliding between two shapes, you can start sliding around between all three shapes. So I can start down here. And that's just one tiny example of this. Your options are honestly limitless. It's totally up to you which points you slide from and what sounds good to you. I'll quickly just show you that transition because it's kind of handy to at least kind of have one just to maybe practice and get used to it. But what I do is I start on this lowest shape here. I play up to my bridge point here and slide from there. So I go, you can use your pinky or this finger, it doesn't matter. Then I carry on our home bass scale till I reach that bridge point that I talked about in the other one, and then I slide up from that one. So it's a fun one to play around with, but don't get too locked into this one because I really want you to be coming up with your own stuff. Okay, so how does this all fit in with our chord changes? Well, what we've essentially got now is this huge chunk of the neck where there's a whole bunch of allowed notes for us to play. And because all of these notes are diatonic, they're all gonna work over every single diatonic chord in the key. Now, they're not all gonna equally sound as great, and that's gonna be up to you to kind of figure out which notes sound good over which chords. But the thing that you've got here is a whole bunch of options. Now, depending on which chords I'm playing and where I'm landing from the chord roadmap, that's gonna kind of dictate which shapes and which notes I'm going to play. So when I'm playing a 5 chord from this key, I'm probably more likely gonna play notes from that scale shape. And if I'm playing a 6 chord, I'm gonna play notes from that scale shape. Now, if I'm moving from my 5 chord to my 6 chord, I can actually use both scale shapes and our little bridges to essentially bridge the changes together. It's really cool. So what I mean by that is if I'm playing here and I know my next chord is my 6, I can go. Do you see how I use that scale shape and that bridge point as my chord change? So to kind of slow it down for you, I hit the 5 with the rest of the band, come down on it, and before I have to come down with the band on that 6 chord, I'm gonna go just like that. So it's essentially outlining that change for me. And there's a whole bunch of freedom that you can have with that as you get better. Obviously, that's one way of bridging it together. So just as an example, if I were to go back and forth between the 5 and 6 chords, there are a whole bunch of different points I can bridge because like I said, they're all options that I'm allowed to use. So if I go back and forth, I'll just make a bunch up and I can kind of show you what I mean. Your options are totally limitless. Now we do have another scale shape we can play when we go down to this 4 chord, let's say, but we're really not gonna worry about that in this lesson. That'll be for a future part of this series. But we didn't really connect much to this top one. And the reason is because most of our roadmap that's rooted here, it doesn't really get up here. Now you can play all these chords. You can play a G up there instead of down here. So you can play a 4 chord all the way up there and use that other scale shape. But the real reason I wanted to show you this other scale shape was if we're using the other chord roadmap. So if we're in the key of A major, I feel like this is a good key to illustrate this in. And essentially it's rooted on the low E string here rather than on the A string. So instead of our 1 chord being here, like for the key of D, our 1 chord is on this low string. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7 all the way up there. Alternatively, we also have our 7 right here and our 6 right here. So we do have these other notes from the scale, same thing being like 4, 3, and 2 are back here. And that is essentially going to give us access to that standard minor pentatonic scale shape, which is the very first shape that we worked with. So our roadmap is up here, but that shape that we're using is down here. And then that other shape is even lower and further away, kind of unusable with this E string rooted roadmap. But the handy thing is what's right on top of our 1 and our 4 right here is that other scale shape. So to show you that connection, we've got this one right here. And right in front of that, we've got this one right here. And yes, there are more shapes that will continue and overlay over the other parts of this roadmap, but this at least gives you access to now 2 pretty good spots to play in. So if I were to play a chord progression like, let's say a 1 to a 6, we're gonna play it down here instead of up here, to a 2, same thing down here so that it's over top of this nice handy shape. And then let's say we go all the way up to a 5. This is a really nice chord progression. Well, now I've got a whole bunch of area on top of my chord progression that I can play around with. And I'm gonna make sure that I'm using those bridge points in the exact same way to slide back and forth between the different positions. And obviously this is just a very simple example of what you can do here. You can feel free to tie back in those low notes like we did in the first part of this series. But the idea here is to kind of start building out more and more area that you can start feeling comfortable with in between those chord changes. Okay, so as far as things to learn in this video, that's pretty much gonna be it. We've added 2 new scale shapes that are attached and connected to everything we already know. Now, even if you're not getting into the scales between the chords yet, and you're really just using those low notes to play around with, still get used to sliding between them. Getting that sliding technique down is gonna make it so much faster when you do feel like you're ready for those scales. And then on top of that, when you start getting into like soloing and improvising, sliding is a super great technique to have under your belt. A couple other quick things I just wanted to touch on at the end of this video. If you're playing those bass notes and most of what you're doing between the chord changes is playing those notes on the lower strings, you do need to listen and pay attention to what the bass player is playing. If he's just playing root notes as the chords change, you kind of have freedom to do whatever you want there. But if the bass player is playing something that's a little bit more busy, then you probably want to kind of stay out of their way on those low strings. And when that does happen, feel free to jump onto those higher strings and play around with those scale shapes because they're probably going to fit a little bit better. The other thing I wanted to talk about was double stops, and this really does require its own video or section of a video to talk about, but something you can do if you feel like you've kind of got everything down and you're ready to kind of take things to the next level, and I haven't done a video on it yet, I haven't done a part 3 to this yet, you can start playing around with double stops, and all double stops are just playing 2 notes at a time. So instead of just playing single notes all the time when you're playing through scales, you can just play more than 1 note. So single notes like this, you can go. And this isn't something that you should be doing all the time when you're playing through scales. It's just kind of another technique that you can throw in there just to change things up. There are a whole bunch of different kind of harmonies that you can come up with. Just make sure that you're sticking to those notes from the scales that I've shown you. And pretty much everything you come up with is gonna sound pretty usable. Okay, so that's gonna be it for this video. Like I said, I didn't wanna go too crazy with it. I just kind of wanted to show you how you could start building on top of what you already learned in part 1 of this series. If you do have any questions about anything we talked about today, make sure you leave that in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, and please also consider subscribing to the channel as well. I release new guitar content just like this every single week. If you want to support what I'm doing here, I do also have a Patreon where I post some extra stuff. So if you want to check that out, I'll make sure to have that linked below the video. With all that said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.